Welcome to the second session of today's Interact Amsterdam Virtual Festival 2020. Hello if it's your first session, or welcome back if you've been watching sessions over the last 3 days. We've already had a very inspiring session this morning from the Mentor's own user experience consultant, Gabby Mitchum-Evans. Gabby was talking about designing for everyone, how can we prevent digital exclusion. But before we start now, please do get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure you've switched your chat settings to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And do let us know if there are any audio issues or any issues with the stream, and we'll try to get things fixed as soon as possible. Now we're really excited for our second talk of today. This talk is Investigate and Protect: How We Research with Vulnerable People, from the Mentor's own senior user experience consultant, Amber Polley. In this talk, Amber will share her process for protecting both yourself and your participants when taking on difficult subjects. She explores ways not only to ensure you deliver effective research, but also to ensure you create a safe space. After Amber's talk, a Q&A will follow, where Amber encourages you to share and discuss your own process for researching with vulnerable people. For these, please use the Q&A box. I will be asking these to Gabby at the end, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So without any further delay, I'll hand over to Gabby to begin. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Manuela. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm really excited to share this to you today because I think it's a really important topic. Just going to my slides. So just to tell you a bit about what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll give a bit of background about me and who I am, a bit about setting the scene about the talk. So we're all kind of on the same page about what I'm going to be talking about. And then I'll split the talk into 3 different sections. So what we can be considering before we carry out research in this way, what we can be considering during the research, and also after the research, and my kind of advice to conduct research with vulnerable people. So a bit about me to begin with. My name's Amber and I'm a senior UX consultant at Mentor. I was raised in Essex, but then I moved to Bristol to study a degree in psychology and philosophy. And this is really where my interest and passion for studying human behaviour came from, and also where my research background comes from too. I graduated and went into marketing and business development at a social care company, but then changed career into user experience design and research with Mentor, and I've been here for 3 years now. My experience really with this topic comes from a couple of key clients that I've worked with over the years, and a particular client I will be kind of drawing from experiences from is an organisation that works with people who have suffered child sexual abuse. And we do research with them quite regularly. It's not sort of talking about their experiences, but it's kind of testing their digital assets to make sure that it's meeting their needs. And whilst I've been doing this research and working with this particular client, it's really become apparent to me how different this type of research is to the other types of user research I do, and how important it is to kind of realise that and take different considerations when planning this. So I want to just briefly talk a little bit about what this talk is and isn't, so we're kind of all on the same page. Whilst kind of researching this and through my own experience, I've really realised that there's a lot of information out there about how we can legally protect our participants through research and all the ethical considerations and etc. But there's not so much about how user researchers in general protect themselves when they're researching with vulnerable people or researching sensitive topics. So I thought there's a massive gap in the market for this, and there's kind of gaps in training for user researchers regardless of their company. So I thought it's quite important because healthcare professionals have years of training on this, of how to talk to people if they're researching with sensitive topics. So why don't we? Because we could potentially be talking about the same sort of things they do. So I really want to go into kind of how to protect your participants, make sure that they're safe, but also yourself as well. It's going to be practical tips and considerations based on my own experience. So I'm by no means obviously a mental health expert or a healthcare professional myself. However, I'm just drawing on my own experience through the clients that I've worked with, and also observations through colleagues that I know to have done this research before too. And like what Manuela said, this would be a lot easier in person, but since we're remote, I do encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom to really share and discuss whatever experience you have as well within the audience, and any obviously questions you have afterwards. But also if you've done research like this, I really want to kind of make this kind of a bit of a knowledge sharing space as well. And I know that we'll be having kind of potential audience members from across the world today. And I'm just kind of going to reiterate that the experiences and participants, I'll be kind of drawing on experiences from are UK based. However, because we're not sort of going to go into like the legalities around the research, I do believe that everything I'm saying is applicable to wherever you're coming from. Of course, if you're in sort of different types of culture from the UK, then you need to kind of take those into consideration when you're planning your own research as well. So just briefly what this talk isn't. So I'm not really going to go into the legalities of ethical research or legally how to protect yourself or the participant. I will touch on how to kind of about the consent of someone entering your research session, but not really go into kind of really how to get informed consent, and because there's a lot of complications around this with vulnerable people, and there's a lot of information out there, but this will be more sort of practical tips on running the sessions. And not really anything to do with GDPR or sort of data protection or formal responsibilities from that as well. So who are we actually speaking about, and what do I mean when we're talking about a vulnerable participant? So the potentially vague answer really is it's potentially anyone you are researching with. So anyone that could be a participant for your research session could potentially be vulnerable depending on the circumstance they're coming from or depending on the methodology you're using. And I really liked this quote from the Market Research Society, which sums it up really nicely. Participant vulnerability is a complex, dynamic state that can affect anyone at any time for many different reasons. All participants are different with a wide range of needs, abilities, and personal circumstances. These differences can place some in a position of vulnerability or greater risk of harm. So for me, when I was researching about this for this particular talk and just through working with clients, vulnerable, when we're talking about this in a research capacity, is quite a broad word. And I kind of came to the conclusion that it really means anyone or someone who might not be able to give informed consent. And this could be for many different reasons. It could be because they have specific cognitive impairments that kind of stops them from giving informed consent or stops them having that understanding of it. It could be because they're dependent on someone else to give that informed consent for them to be doing the research. And there's lots of different types of vulnerable groups that we could be talking about. So we can be talking about kind of permanent vulnerabilities. So if you're young or you're elderly, fluctuating vulnerabilities, if you're from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, if you're a minority in a particular community or sector in society, if English is your kind of second language, you could be seen as vulnerable research. If you're disabled, if you've experienced trauma, and also if you're in an unequal or dependent relationship, that can make you vulnerable too. The Government Social Research Unit says there's 3 main reasons why someone may be at a high risk of being vulnerable when you're conducting research. So like we've just seen, there's specific vulnerable groups. So specifically for if there's permanent vulnerability, like when you're young or elderly. If you're using particularly invasive methodology in your research, that could mean anyone that you're researching with could be potentially vulnerable. And then also, if you're particularly researching with sensitive topics, that could invoke an emotional kind of memory or trauma from someone. And this is kind of where I'm drawing my experiences from, because this is where the experience I have with working with vulnerable participants has come from. However, the kind of considerations I'll be going through can be applied to all the 3 different groups, but this is just mainly where I'm going to be coming from. So in terms of what actually we mean by sensitive topics, so again, from the Government Social Research Unit, they give a really nice list that I thought I'd go through. It's quite a nice summary of what they could be. So it could be someone that's been involved with or know someone who's been involved with illegal behaviour and contact with the criminal justice system, experience of violence, abuse or exploitation or trauma, anything to do with their health, so mental or physical health, sexual behaviour, cognitive impairments, genetics, anything like that. Their income, unemployment or benefit receipt. I was working with a client and it wasn't around kind of research with vulnerable people. However, it became apparent that there was vulnerabilities within the research participants we were talking to. We were working with an energy company and their customers, and the main target audience we were working with were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they were all paying for their energy through prepayment meters. And it wasn't really apparent beforehand, but people were coming into those sessions with a lot of kind of emotion about the way they paid for their energy. And it kind of came through when they were asking the questions. So by kind of learning about how to deal with vulnerable participants and what you need to consider, you can also prepare yourself for these kind of unexpected moments as well. And also topics around children and family life can also be sensitive too. So any researchers in the audience will know this, and hopefully anyone else who's not a researcher, it would be quite clear, but back to basics, ethical research should always avoid personal or social harm. So how are we meant to do this when potentially our research is dealing with sensitive topics? So I've broken this down into what we can think about before, during, and after the research. So before the research is a lot about kind of planning and your setup. So to begin with, before you've even started planning, you really need to think about, do you need to do this research? What other information is out there? What other kind of data you can be drawing on that means you don't have to go out to this particularly vulnerable group of participants and kind of ask them about this again? Is this kind of, could you be getting the research or information through other means, less invasive means, self-reporting means like surveys or questionnaires? Could you analyze the current data that's already out there? If you're working with a client for this, what other research do they already have? It might mean that the client, if you do a bit of desktop research about what they have, they don't actually need to go out and ask these questions again because they already have enough in their background anyway. You could also just be looking for opinion pieces through social media, getting opinion-based research through that as well. You don't have to go out specifically and be asking these people these questions potentially. And again, what is the impact of this research going to be on yourself and the participants? Really kind of get to know that this might have a social and personal impact, and you really need to kind of be asking that question. And if the answer to do you need to do this research is still yes, then you need to find out as much about the context as you possibly can. And I'm not talking really about the details of each participant because you might not even know who you're researching with yet, but it's more just finding out about the situation these participants are going to be coming from and what issues they're going to be bringing into the sessions. Because it really can, and you need to get informed from, if you're working with a client, they potentially will have this information. If you're working with a group that you already know, maybe a colleague will know this. And it's really going to help with managing any issues that's going to be in those sessions. So if, for example, you're working with a group that has particular trauma from a particular gender and they're not comfortable around people that are either male or female that they don't know, you know not to include that gender in the people who are involved in the research. It will also really massively affect your setup. So you need to know as much information to know kind of what other setups and considerations you need to be doing. And also it will affect whether you need to go out and do any more specific training before you do the research or any of the kind of other awareness information you need to have. I, for one, have done taken part in a dementia awareness session in my last job. This wasn't anything to do with research, but I now know a bit more about how to make people with dementia feel more comfortable around me, what kind of things to and not to say, if they're coming into a new environment, how that environment can be kind of set up in a safe way for them, depending on what stage in their illness they're in. So I now feel a bit more confident and kind of more aware, and I've had that kind of training if I do research with anyone who's kind of had dementia, or anyone who's elderly and kind of has it as well. And after you find out all the information about the situation and the topics, you need to really be honest with yourself. So this is where you're kind of protecting yourself. Are you going to be okay researching this? What previous history have you got with this particular topic? If it's nothing, great, then hopefully there's not going to be this emotional response from you, but you really need to be kind of thinking about yourself and really checking in with yourself to say, are you going to be okay? What kind of emotional triggers has this potentially already brought out in you as you've been kind of like talking about this, either with your client or with your group or whoever you're researching with? And this you need to be doing throughout. So it's not just about when you're planning, kind of checking in immediately, okay, we're going to be talking about something around kind of something that's illegal or violence, and kind of checking you're okay at the beginning. You need to be checking in throughout, which is what we're going to be talking about as we go through. So next you need to think about your methodology. So when you're actually planning, what is going to be really appropriate for your particular participants. So you could be conducting research through telephone interviews or over the phone. This might be a good methodology for people who kind of don't want to be meeting up with people one-on-one or going into a new environment. However, if you're researching with vulnerable elderly people, some of these people, especially who have dementia, they won't know or can't know the difference between scam calls and genuine calls. So this won't be appropriate for them, and it will kind of put them in a vulnerability. If you're going into their own environment, if you're going into one of their support groups or their houses, what considerations do you need to be making for going into their environment? How can you make it as comfortable as possible for them, and obviously be respectful of the fact that you're encroaching onto their environment? Is it going to be in your work environment? Are they going to come into your office, your research labs, your own support groups? and what kind of things you need to be thinking about to make that comfortable. Is that appropriate for them? Are they going to be okay coming into somewhere that's new for them? You could be thinking about going and using a neutral environment, so talking and meeting up in a cafe or going for a walk in a local park. However, I would say this comes with its own risks as well, because neutral environments are much harder to control, not just through noise, but also confidentiality. I would highly recommend to be in a room that kind of can be closed off, so that the participant feels okay and safe to kind of disclose anything that they need to. And also, if you're specifically asking quite sensitive questions, it might be easier or more comfortable for people to be writing down their responses at certain times. So think about the resources you need to be taking to that session for people to do that. And then think about the setup. So what extras do you really need to be doing? It might be providing support leaflets. So where are you going to be signposting your participants to during and after the research sessions so that they can have support? And who's going to be printing those things off? And who's going to be providing them? Maybe the medium consent needs to change. Can you record the consent and do a verbal consent and read it out and get them to kind of verbally consent to what you need to? Is it going to be written? Is it going to be online? You really need to think about what's appropriate for these people and what situation they're in. This is for anyone kind of going into another environment, but especially for people who are going to be potentially vulnerable or sensitive to certain things. Really bring ID, make sure you're showing people that you're the formal official researcher, that you're a safe pair of hands and they can really trust and they know that kind of you are who you say you are. And it's going to give immediate reassurance to anyone. And think about the physical space and plan for that. So us at Mensa, we have a research lab in a particular room. We have set up a comfortable sofa and a chair, so we have a space for interviews in a comfortable environment with kind of more like a lounge, feels more like a lounge with warm lighting. And we also have a space for kind of formal computer testing and stuff like that. So think about kind of what that means for the individual participant. Think about if they're going to bring someone with them. Are they able to sit next to each other? Do you have that space for that? Are they going to be sat nearer to the door so they kind of feel they can kind of exit the room comfortably if they want to? And think about the fact you really need to tell all your colleagues that this is happening. Please don't disturb me. Put signs on the door to say that, you know, please don't walk in, because it'll be the worst thing for someone to walk in as someone's disclosing something quite emotional and you have to kind of interrupt them. And the next couple of slides, I think if anyone's going to take anything from this, is the most important for me anyway. So this is really about your own well-being and sharing out that load of the sessions with a buddy. So find someone that you can research with. So I'd kind of buddy up with someone, either someone you know or a colleague, potentially someone who's already done this type of research before with this participant group and maybe could act as a mentor for you. But just have someone that you can share the session load with. So either alternating days or alternating between sessions, so that if you're talking about heavy stuff, you don't have to kind of immediately go back to back with these research sessions. It also means that someone is there to step in that knows the research background and the design. So if something happens within the session or you don't feel comfortable, someone else can step in, either stop the session or finish it for you. And going back to kind of health professionals who will be talking obviously much more about these topics day to day, but it's a health professional technique that they have debriefs and supervisions with a mentor or buddy, either every day or every week. So counsellors, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, they all do this. And user research as an industry is kind of behind in this, because we're talking about these particular topics, but we don't have the same techniques in place to really protect ourselves. So this is all about debriefing with your buddy afterwards, either after every session and or after all the research has been done. And you're kind of emotionally decompressing with them, saying kind of what happened in those sessions, how you feel about that, what happened for you. And also it gives you a place of a bit of advice kind of like about each case as well. And also thinking about their buddies as well. So what is their support system going to be? And I would recommend having 2 different buddies for them. So the first one would be professional support. Ideally, if you're working with a particular client who has experience with this particular participant group, they'll be able to provide professional support and they'll have a system in place. So either they'll have counsellors or they'll have their own kind of team of support. I know I'm quite lucky with the client that I've worked with in the past. They have a whole forum and a whole support system for these particular people who have gone through this particular abuse. So we can really kind of use that, and they provided that support for us. However, if the client is unable to provide professional support or counsellors or anyone that could come to those research sessions and be there afterwards, there's stuff that you can do as well. So You could either partner with a charity that has experience with this particular topic, and you could say, could you provide anyone for these couple of days of research we're doing? Or could someone be at the other end of the phone line for people to be ringing up after the research session as well, just so that you know that after that session, a participant has somewhere to go to if they need to talk to someone about it. And also you can offer them to have personal support. So say that a friend, carer, relative can also come, either to be in the session with them or to be outside. To a lot of the time is just to get them there. So if it's going to be potentially triggering or sensitive topic for them, they're going to be quite potentially stressed out, and it's going to be harder for them to kind of concentrate on how to get there, and it's going to be potentially more stressful than just going anywhere else or anywhere else new. So even if they're just being driven to and from the sessions, that would be really supportive for them. And this really helps take the pressure off you. So you as the researcher want to be focusing on your own health and facilitating the session and making sure obviously the research is going well. So it really takes the kind of caretaking pressure off you, because you know that there's professional and personal support for them as well, and you can focus on yourself. And also if you can, I'd also recommend, again, kind of from my own experiences, my client has, and we offer support with kind of transport costs as well to get to and from the venue if it's in your own environment for the participants. Again, it might be quite stressful for them thinking about planning or getting there. So any kind of extra help can really mitigate all those stresses and make them as comfortable as possible when they're coming into those sessions. So any sort of financial help, any kind of directions are really clear, instructions how to get to you, obviously by car, public transport, any kind of means. What childcare support can you give? Could you give any money towards that as well? And like kind of that can be a barrier to people not being able to do the research, so that can help. And also in past kind of sessions, we've also offered financial support for the carers as well, so covering their transport costs too. And a really important one I wanted to kind of sort of finish on with this section was time. Everyone's going to underestimate the time taken to do a lot of things, and it's no different with research with vulnerable groups. So there's always going to be a lot more unexpected conversations that might come out of these particular topics, so you need to really just plan in time for that. Just add more time. I would usually, my session's probably 45 minutes to an hour, and I'm just doing sort of neutral user research. And for particular ones I've done in the past for vulnerable participants, it's mainly gone up to an hour and a quarter. I would say even that's not enough. Give an hour and a half session. You're probably not going to use all that time, but it just gives you that buffer to make sure that if anything kind of overruns, that you have that time, you have that debrief time as well in between the sessions. And of course, if you're using the debrief time and you've got your buddy, you need to be planning in this time as well after every session and at the end of the day. And also do less. So you're not obviously, if the sessions are longer, you're not going to be able to do as many per day. Normally, if I'm doing kind of quite research intensive days, I'll do 5 or 6 sessions a day. I'd probably cut that down to 3 or 4 maximum. You'd still potentially going to be able to do your 6 if you do that per day, because you've got your buddy to alternate. But it's just about kind of mitigating and kind of taking off that load of this heavy kind of research topic off you as much as possible. So just add more time. So I thought I'd summarize, that was quite a big section, so I thought I'd summarize before going on to the next part. So think about, actually, do you need to do this research first and foremost? Find out as much about the context as possible if you are going to go along with the research. Be honest with yourself once you know that context. Are you going to be okay? What is your appropriate methodology? What's appropriate for your participants from what you know about them? What extras do you need to be doing? Who's your body going to be? Are they okay going to be doing the research too? Who's their buddy going to be? Who's going to provide that professional support? And have you said that they can bring about personal support for them too? What extra help can you be offering? How can you plan that in as well? And just add extra time as much as you possibly can. So moving on to what we can consider during the research. So to begin with, when you're if they're either coming into your work environment or you're kind of meeting up with them, it's all about settling them in and making them feel as comfortable as possible around you, so that they feel safe and they feel okay disclosing what they need to be, or just kind of talking about the topic that you're going to be doing. So I do this regardless of kind of who I'm talking with, whether it's people with vulnerabilities or just any sessions I do with research in my career. I always welcome them with neutral questions. If you're a researcher, you have communication skills, so just draw on this. Just ask them how their day is. Have they done any research before? Talk about that if they have. Ask them what they're going to be doing after the session as well. Just really trying to relax them in your kind of presence. And I also use this as a technique for when I get actually into the research questions. So I always start my research with a couple of neutral questions that are still kind of on the research topic. If I'm working with a client, it's potentially questions that the client I don't really care about. So going back to the example of the energy provider, I'd ask them, how do you, what's your kind of energy provider with? Have you changed your provider in the past year? It's just kind of getting people relaxed in the notions of what the topic is going to be about. It's just about relaxing yourself as well. Talk about a bit about where you are. So if you're going into their environment, ask them questions. Is it okay to sit down here? Where can I set up? Ask them a bit about kind of like the environment they're in, make them feel as comfortable as possible and respect their environment because you're the one going in there. And if they're coming into your space, then maybe is it appropriate to kind of give them a quick tour of the office if people aren't around, to just really show them that this is the office space, this is where you are, it's a new environment for you, everything's okay, here's the exit, here's the toilets, here's the kind of room we're going to be researching in today. Just give them as much information as possible to really relax them. And also, if you kind of recruited these people, not yourself, or you've been, excuse me, talking through email or phone, you never really know how much of the information of the research your participants will have kind of taken in or already know. So it's always a really good idea to talk about the research and give all the information again. So why you're doing the research, how you're going to be doing the research, what's kind of expected of them throughout the session and what that's going to involve. And also at the end, have a chance to check in again, because your participants might have given informed consent 2 weeks prior, and then within that time they would have thought, actually I don't really want to be talking about this again with someone, but they potentially haven't had that kind of interaction with someone again to tell someone that they don't want to do it. So you really need to give them that chance to do that just before the session starts, and just check in that they really are okay once they've been given all the information again to go ahead. And I would say this is kind of, as a researcher, quite a hard one to do, because you're always going to have your facilitator hat on, but it's something about kind of taking off the hat a little bit, because you need to just let things happen a bit more. There's going to be unpredictable and unexpected conversations that might happen and tangents that might happen. And normally as a facilitator, you can kind of steer that and interrupt people potentially if necessary. But for this, you kind of really need to think that you can't really be interrupting people if they're really kind of going into emotive topics. Sensitive topics can really generate talkative participants, which is something I wasn't aware of until I'd kind of conducted research like this before. And there was one participant I had who had only just very recently shared her experience of abuse that they'd been through, and she'd sat on that information for 30 years, and she'd only disclosed that information maybe a couple of months prior. So it kind of brought out a lot of kind of chat within her, and she kind of used that research session, even though it wasn't necessarily about her experiences, about kind of a neutral topic, she kind of then went on to kind of talk about it again. And it wasn't the case that I could interrupt her or kind of say, oh, we need to get back on this. It's just about showing compassion for what these people have been going through and give them that space to be talking. And it's okay. You can be prepared that there actually is not going to be any research done in that hour or that hour and a half, because you just need to kind of let things happen. It's okay if that hour and one of your sessions goes off on a tangent, because the comfortableness of yourself and that participant is paramount to anything. It is just research. As long as that person feels safe and comfortable, then that's the most important thing. And it's okay. But on that, kind of on the flip side, obviously being offloaded onto with a lot of emotive topics, it can be very hard on you. So if you need to, you just need to stop the research questions or stop the session. As much as I say, don't interrupt them if they are kind of going off on a tangent. But if you're feeling uncomfortable and overwhelmed, it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I just need to kind of like go talk to my buddy or my colleague. And then your buddy can come in, either finish the session for you or stop the session and say, it's okay. We've kind of got what we need today. And if, for example, if your participant is the one kind of visibly looking overwhelmed, it's okay to stop the question and check in with them and suggest if their carer or health professional can come in and support them. And again, this is why check-ins are so important. You might not always know if a participant feels overwhelmed, or you might not know if you're feeling overwhelmed until you kind of mentally check in with yourself or verbally check in with the participant, and then you know. And again, if you need to swap in with your buddy. So like we just said, it's really important kind of within sessions and after sessions to offer and take breaks and check-ins as much as possible. So within the sessions, offer a break for your participants, check in maybe after the first couple of questions, once you've got into the flow of things, to make sure they're still okay to proceed. After the session, you need to potentially take a break yourself before you have a debrief with your buddy or before the next one. That's okay too. Just be as honest with yourself as possible. And check in with your participant to say, are you okay? Like, how are you going to get home? Do you need a bit of time before that happens? Do you need to talk to the professional here or your buddy? Kind of give them that potentially that room for the next 15 minutes to have a bit of like emotional decompression with their support system too. That's kind of where the time comes in. If you're kind of mitigating and managing these issues and giving the space and time, then your research sessions will flow quite well. So just a bit of a summary of that as well. So it's really important to settle them in, make sure it's a safe and comfortable environment for them, and just being a part of kind of your research session with them. Let things happen, kind of take your facilitator hat off a little bit more than you would normally, because you just need to show that compassion for what they're talking about. And stop if you're uncomfortable. It's not life or death, it's just research. So if you can't do it, please don't. As much as you have a serious boss or client that's kind of got putting pressure on you, you need to put your health and the participants' health first and foremost above absolutely anything. Offer breaks and take breaks yourself, and check in with yourself and them during the research is very important. So what can we consider after the research to make sure we're ongoing, kind of protecting ourselves and participant? So this might be appropriate immediately after the session or kind of via email or phone afterwards as well. But you need to kind of reassure the participants how you're going to collect the research and who's going to have access to the findings and their data. They might come into this session with a bit of worry or scared about where their data is going to go or who's going to have access, because they might be someone who's dependent on someone else and they're scared that that person's going to find out that they've been talking about it. So you would need to give the reassurance that only kind of either the client or people they know are going to have access to it. Obviously, everything is going to remain confidential. Absolutely no names or identifying information will be part of your report or will be going out anywhere. You can even offer a summary of your results and email that to them and say, give them physical evidence that this is kind of what's come out of it and who's going to have access to that and who you're going to be reporting that back to. It's all about giving that reassurance. I would suggest, even if you can kind of give this reassurance immediately after session, you can kind of follow up with email as well, so they can kind of have that to refer back to and mitigate those nerves. Sometimes it's not appropriate to be talking about this because they might be a bit overwhelmed, so really sort of delay that until you can talk to them via email. And at the end of the day, you need to be contactable. It doesn't have to be you, but either who you're researching with, your client, or who kind of they've been in contact with. Someone needs to be contactable for these participants so that if they've got any issues or concerns or questions after the research, they can kind of have them answered and reassured. Because it's not just a case of saying, right, we're done, this session's over, you're okay to leave. You still need to be giving that support, whoever that may be, to these participants afterwards too. And another check-in, so for yourself really this time, as well as kind of doing your check-ins and your debriefs after your sessions and after all the research has been conducted, you need to be checking in mentally or just via message with your buddies, kind of after you conduct the research, after the research project's been finalised, and maybe a couple of weeks after that as well, and continually check in. I, for one, I'm quite introverted, so I know that things that have been said to me or that I see sticks with me for quite a while, and I think quite deeply about them. And I know that a lot of the effects of it won't come out probably until maybe a week or so later. Some things I've heard from participants that I've spoken to still sticks with me like 2 years later after I've spoken about them. So, and I'm okay because I can deal with that, and I know I can deal with that, and I kind of checked in with myself that that's fine, and I would be able to do that in future. But you really still need to continuously check in with yourself to make sure you're okay and you're getting the support you need, and what can your body do for you. And then if you are kind of working with a client, or if you're kind of presenting this back to your colleagues or a group, you need to be thinking about who's going to be in that room, pre-warning anyone about kind of sensitive topics you might be bringing up, so that they can kind of make their own decisions about whether they want to be in the room or not. And again, if you're kind of reporting back or giving out a report or documentation, you need to include trigger warnings on your documentation to begin with. If you don't know whether that client that you give it to might be managing someone, and they can kind of say, oh, have a look at this, read through. You don't know what vulnerability they might be coming from. So you really need to include those trigger warnings there too. And obviously confidentiality is crucial. Don't include any names, any defining characteristics. I think the most that I would say whenever I'm kind of reporting or presenting about findings would maybe be the gender or age. Sometimes I steer clear of that anyway, but well, probably only gender, I would say. So just try and steer clear as much as possible about any details or information about particular participants. So just really to summarize that then, give your reassurance either immediately after or via email about how you're going to collate your research and who's going to have access. Check in with yourself at key points. This is a really key time to be making sure that you're okay and protecting yourself after you kind of conducted this type of research. Think about who you're presenting to and pre-warning and protecting them as well. So I thought it'd be quite a nice way to conclude. So I've done the 3 different sections now and summarised them. The Market Research Society has a guide and 10 questions, which for anyone kind of looking back to this recording who wants to kind of be looking at this as a guide for them planning this type of research and doesn't have much time, then I thought it'd be quite nice to finish on this and have for you to kind of quickly go through these questions to make sure you're prepared as possible. So these are questions to be asking yourself before you're actually conducting research, and it kind of really nicely summarises what I've been going through. So number 1, do members of the research team know how to recognise vulnerability and deal with vulnerable participants? Is supporting guidance and/or training on good practices available? Have researchers received specific training ahead of the project? Are researchers aware that support materials, helpline numbers may be provided to participants? Has a relevant support group or charity been contacted for their advice on any specific areas? Have staff been briefed on how to react if any abuse or serious crime is revealed? I think during the research sessions, this will be kind of where you heavily rely on that professional support. Can participants contact the agency conducting the research without difficulty, so being contactable? Are participants at risk because of their individual circumstances? Is the informed consent processes tailored for the participants involved? And has the impact of the research project on participants been assessed? And I would add that has the impact been on the research project on yourself being assessed as well? So that's kind of like my talk concluded. And I thought that's quite a nice roundup of the different questions you could be asking yourself before you conduct this type of research. I've put a couple of references in there if you kind of want to be reading up a bit more about this as well, if you're kind of rereading through or watching the recording. And so, yeah, thank you very much for listening in. If anyone wants to kind of discuss or talk further about this, I'll be more than happy to. You can kind of contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn there, and that's probably the best ways to contact me. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Amber. Such an educative talk and great to learn more about how to research with vulnerable people. I'm just checking if we got first questions in. Okay, I think I'm going to start. So while you were explaining all those sensitive topics, I was thinking of, so when you recruit the people for participating in researches, I could imagine it's quite different if you have to recruit from this target group than if it's like a common research. So how do you approach that, and how do you get actually people joining researches from vulnerable groups?
Yeah, so that's really interesting and important point. I think yeah, as you say, it's quite different. I think for me, the clients I've worked with, we've been able to use their contacts and their own support groups that they have. So it's been they've already got this kind of safe space and safe environment that the client has to kind of draw on these participants, and they already know that it's going to be okay. It's very different if a third party kind of is recruiting, or we're going out to people who they don't know to be like, oh, can you come and talk about this? It's not going to put people at ease. So as much as possible, if you can draw on kind of your client contacts and be looking through your client, or if you're kind of within a particular healthcare professional group, kind of drawing on the people that have access to these particular people or vulnerable groups, kind of going through them to make sure that they're kind of in a safe space. What was the other part of your question? I can't remember. I had a point to say, but
that is about it. But also actually wondering if you do normal research, quite often like participants get an incentive. How is it with the vulnerable groups? Do they also get incentives, or how is that being handled? What is the right approach?
I think it depends on what you're doing. The clients I've worked with have offered consent because that's just what's been appropriate for them. Other clients I know kind of haven't offered consent because it's kind of people either being recruited from specific support groups, and the research is about kind of helping support groups or about their own mental health and stuff like that. So it's more it doesn't really change in terms of what's appropriate for the client and what isn't, and kind of if you're researching with people that it's actually not appropriate or they can't give monetary incentives, or then that's fine too. Sometimes you can offer a charity donation if it's not appropriate to be giving monetary incentives, or yeah, that can be something you can do too.
Fantastic. We got a question coming in from Zoe. Zoe asked, first she says, great talk. How can we make our audiences, companies more aware of this and provide more support for researchers?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I was coming from with this, really, because I kind of saw a gap in kind of people's training and abilities to be protecting themselves and be prepared for this. I think it's about if a client comes to you and says they want to do particular research with particular vulnerable groups, and you recognise that this might be a vulnerable group, it's kind of having that upfront conversation with the client as early as possible to say, are you aware of kind of the extra considerations we need to do? Again, kind of asking them what else can we be doing instead of more kind of invasive methods, I guess. And maybe taking these kind of considerations and talking them through with your client beforehand, before you've even kind of started planning, to make them aware of everything and make them kind of consider this before actually going through the research. And yeah, I guess to kind of make yourself more prepared is going through these considerations, researching as much as possible. I think for me as well, it helped quite a lot that I'd already been involved with a particular client with the people that had child sexual abuse, and I kind of had already kind of read up a lot about their experiences more. So I was more prepared that I knew I was going to be okay discussing this. So kind of suggest that to your clients if they're having researchers or, you know, other people that are going to be researching this, research for yourself or read up about it as much as possible to really know kind of how you're going to react to it.
Thank you. Nancy's asking, hey Amber, such an eye-opening talk. Thank you for sharing your experiences. When working on a busy project, there's not always time to give these sensitive topics the time they deserve. How do you get other people to realize the sensitivity of this topic?
Yeah, good point. I know it's quite an interesting one, because if you are in kind of an agency environment, it's very hard to be persuade people to kind of put in more time and less research time to protecting yourself and your participants. I think it's just about having a frank discussion with them and saying that, maybe pose a question to them and say, how would you feel, how comfortable would you feel kind of talking about particular topics, and what would you need to support yourself, and get them thinking about the effect it would have on them. And then potentially, hopefully, they would realize that there's more considerations, there's more time that's needed, there's more debrief time that's needed for this type of research and the planning involved. It's kind of trying to get them to think in their own kind of context. And I guess maybe get them to research a bit about kind of the situations that the participants might be going through. If people can see other experiences that other people are going through, that maybe they can kind of empathize a bit more, and then realize that you need to be giving in more time and to this. So yeah, kind of drawing on people's empathies, I would say, is the main one for that.
Cool, thank you. I don't see a new question coming in. So I would say I think we came to the end of this session. I'm going to thank you very much, Amber. I really loved your speech. Fantastic to share these insights with us. So next session will be at 4 p.m. Amsterdam time today, or 3 p.m. London time. In this talk, Kate Nightingale, head consumer psychologist and founder of Style Psychology, will talk about designing for the whole brain, multisensory and emotive human experiences. While I was saying that, I just saw another question coming in. I think we still got time. Maybe we can answer that as well. No, Rebecca, you're not too late. I'm gonna read the question. I work in mortality reviews for people with LD, so we cannot select our participants. We are obliged to offer opportunity to participants to their families and carers, but it can be a real challenge to reach out to these people up to a year after the person has passed away. Do you have any suggestions for ways to ease that initial contact? Difficult question.
Yeah, I'm just going to take some time to read through that so I can kind of take it in. Yeah, that can be difficult, I guess, if you're kind of offering ongoing support. Yeah, if it's a long time kind of after the research you're potentially doing or the initial contact. I guess hopefully I'm kind of answering what you mean, but if it's around kind of the difficulties of keeping in contact, then it's kind of potentially knowing that to begin with and thinking, how else am I going to be able to contact with these people? Is there a particular group that you have partnered with before and that you can have access to these people that you know through that group? And it's not necessarily if you don't have their kind of contact details afterwards, but will they always be in contact with a particular support group or anything that you can kind of use them to kind of get the contact through them as well, I guess. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Happy that we still could see and spot the question. So now, if you haven't signed up for the next session, there's still time to do though. Go to Eventbrite and sign up. The next session, as mentioned, will be at 4 p.m. I will close this session. Thank you very much for all joining and see you at 4. Have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.